The sound of clinking champagne glasses still echoes in my memory, though not for the reasons you might think. It was Sarah's 28th birthday, and our parents had outdone themselves with the surprise that would forever change the dynamics of our family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because every story of transformation has its roots in moments we'd rather forget. I've always been the other sibling in the Mitchell family. Not the problematic one, not the rebellious one, just the other one. Sarah was the golden child, valedictorian, marketing degree from Northwestern, corner office at a prestigious firm by 25. I was the one who dropped out of business school to pursue what my father called pipe dreams, and what my mother referred to as that coffee thing. For 3 years, I'd been working on opening my own specialty coffee shop, studying roasting techniques, perfecting recipes, building a business plan that I genuinely believed could work. But belief, I learned, doesn't always translate to family support. The restaurant my parents chose for Sarah's birthday dinner was one of those places where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters know your name. I arrived wearing my best shirt, the one I'd been saving for important occasions, carrying a small wrapped gift I'd spent weeks choosing. Sarah's present was a vintage coffee table book about cafe culture around the world. I thought it was perfect, thoughtful, personal, something that showed I'd been paying attention to her recent interest in travel photography. The table was set for 8. My parents, David and Margaret, Sarah and her boyfriend James, my Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda, and myself. I took my usual seat at the end of the table, the one that somehow always seemed to be positioned where the conversations flowed around me rather than through me. The dinner started normally enough. Talk about work, weekend plans, the unseasonably warm weather we'd been having. Sarah looked radiant in a way that suggested she knew something special was coming. It was during dessert that my father stood up, tapping his wine glass with his knife in that theatrical way he'd perfected over years of corporate presentations. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him successful in real estate development. "To Sarah, who has not only made us proud with her achievements, but who is about to embark on a new chapter of independence." My mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a ring box, something larger, more substantial. Sarah's eyes widened as she opened it, revealing a set of keys attached to a leather keychain, embossed with an address I didn't recognize. "We bought you a loft," my mother announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "Downtown, in the Arts District, fully furnished, 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, everything you've ever wanted." The table erupted in congratulations. James immediately pulled out his phone to start looking up the address. Uncle Robert began calculating property values. Aunt Linda was already planning housewarming party themes. Sarah sat there with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. I forced myself to smile, to clap along with everyone else, to murmur the appropriate words of congratulations. Inside, I was doing mental math of my own. The loft they'd described probably cost more than I'd managed to save in 3 years of working various jobs while building my business plan. It was the kind of gesture that spoke to possibilities I'd never even dared to consider. But the moment that would haunt me, the moment that would fuel everything that came after, happened as we were all raising our glasses in toast. My mother, perhaps feeling the need to address the elephant in the room, turned to me with what I can only describe as an afterthought smile. "Oh, and Marcus," she said, as if she'd just remembered I was there. "You know Luis at that Subway on 5th Street? He mentioned he's hiring. You should give him a call." The table went silent. Not the comfortable silence of shared appreciation, but the awkward silence of social discomfort. Everyone suddenly found their dessert plates fascinating. James cleared his throat. Uncle Robert looked at his watch. Sarah stared at our mother with an expression that mixed surprise with something that might have been sympathy. I felt my face flush, that familiar heat that comes with public humiliation. Here was my sister, receiving a gift worth more than most people's annual salaries, and I was being offered information about a sandwich shop job. The juxtaposition was so stark, so painfully clear, that I wondered if anyone else could feel the weight of it. "Thanks for the tip," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. "I'll look into it." But inside something shifted. Not just embarrassment or hurt, though those were certainly present, but a crystallization of understanding. This was how my family saw me. Not as someone with potential, not as someone working towards something meaningful, but as someone who needed to be managed, guided towards safe, conventional employment. I finished my dessert, participated in the remainder of the conversation, and helped carry gifts to cars. I hugged Sarah goodbye, genuinely happy for her success, even as I processed my own feelings. When my parents offered to drive me home, I declined, saying I wanted to walk off the dinner. What I really wanted was time to think. The walk home took me through the downtown area where Sarah's new loft was located. I found myself stopping in front of the building, a converted warehouse with large windows, and the kind of architectural details that spoke to both history and possibility. It was beautiful. She deserved it. But standing there, I realized something crucial. I deserved possibilities too. That night, I sat in my cramped studio apartment and wrote out everything I'd been feeling. Not just about the dinner, but about years of being seen as the family project, the one who needed fixing, the one whose dreams were treated as hobbies. I wrote about the business plan I'd been refining, the connections I'd been building, the vision I had for creating something meaningful. But more than that, I wrote about the disconnect between how I saw myself and how my family saw me. I'd been allowing their perception to define my reality, to limit my ambitions, to make me smaller than I actually was. The suggestion about the subway job wasn't just insensitive. It was revelatory. It showed me exactly how they viewed my potential. I made a decision that night. I would stop waiting for their approval, their support, their belief in my vision. I would stop allowing their limited understanding of my capabilities to define my actions. I would build what I wanted to build, with or without their encouragement. The next morning, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I started posting videos online about coffee. Not just brewing techniques, but the stories behind different beans, the cultural significance of coffee in different countries, the craft of roasting. I'd been hesitant to put myself out there, worried about what people might think, concerned about seeming presumptuous. But the dinner had stripped away those concerns. If my own family saw me as someone suitable for sandwich assembly, then strangers' opinions couldn't possibly be more devastating. The response was immediate and encouraging. Coffee enthusiasts began following my content, asking questions, sharing their own experiences. Local roasters started reaching out, interested in collaboration. Small business owners in the food industry began commenting, offering advice and encouragement. Within weeks, I had built a community of people who shared my passion and respected my knowledge. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman named Elena Rodriguez, who owned a small chain of specialty food stores, saw my videos and reached out directly. She'd been looking for someone to partner with on a coffee concept, someone who understood both the product and the culture surrounding it. She'd been impressed not just by my knowledge, but by my authenticity, my genuine passion for the craft. We met for coffee, appropriately enough, at a small cafe in the same downtown district where Sarah's loft was located. Elena was direct and businesslike, but also warm and encouraging. She explained that she'd been successful in retail, but wanted to expand into the experiential food sector. She had the capital and business acumen, She needed someone with the product knowledge and genuine passion. Over the course of several meetings, we developed a partnership structure that was more generous than anything I dared to hope for. Elena would provide the initial investment and business guidance, while I would handle the product development, staff training, and day-to-day operations. Most importantly, she believed in my vision for creating a space that wasn't just about selling coffee, but about building community around the appreciation of craft. The location we found was perfect, a corner space in a building that was undergoing renovation, with large windows and enough room for both a retail area and a small seating section. It was 3 blocks from Sarah's Loft, close enough to the arts district to attract the creative community I wanted to serve, but affordable enough to make the numbers work. For 2 weeks, I worked on the business plan, the lease negotiations, the equipment sourcing, and the staffing plans. I told no one in my family what I was doing. I needed to prove to myself that I could make this work before I subjected it to their skepticism or their well-meaning but misguided advice. The second family dinner happened 2 weeks later. It was supposed to be a casual Sunday meal, but I'd requested it specifically because I had something to share. I arrived carrying a manila envelope, the kind that usually contains important documents. Sarah was there again, this time with photos of her new loft on her phone, eager to show everyone how the decorating was progressing. "The exposed brick is even better than we thought," she was saying as I took my seat. "And the view from the bedroom window is incredible. You can see the whole arts district." My parents beamed with pride, asking detailed questions about her decorating choices and her plans for housewarming parties. I listened, genuinely interested, genuinely happy for her success. But I also felt a calm confidence that hadn't been there 2 weeks earlier. "I have some news, too," I said during a pause in the conversation. My father looked up from his plate. "Did you call Luis about that job?" "No," I said, pulling the envelope from beside my chair. "I didn't call Luis, but I did make some calls." I opened the envelope and pulled out the partnership agreement I'd signed with Elena, along with the signed lease for the coffee shop space and the business plan we'd developed together. I spread them out on the table like a poker player, revealing a winning hand. "I'm opening a specialty coffee shop," I announced, downtown in the arts district. "I have a business partner who's providing the initial investment, and we're planning to open in 8 weeks. The silence that followed was different from the one 2 weeks earlier. This wasn't the silence of discomfort, but the silence of surprise, of processing, of recalibration. My mother was the first to speak. "You're opening a business?" "I'm opening a business," I confirmed, "with Elena Rodriguez, who owns 3 successful specialty food stores. She saw my content online and reached out about a partnership." Sarah leaned forward, studying the documents. "This is a real business plan. This is comprehensive. It's something I've been working on for months," I said. "The partnership made it possible to move forward." My father picked up the lease agreement, examining it with the professional eye of someone who'd spent decades in real estate. "This location. This is a good location. The rent is reasonable for the area. It's 3 blocks from Sarah's Loft," I added. "We're hoping to serve the creative community that's growing in that neighborhood." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd had about my professional aspirations. Instead of polite encouragement or gentle skepticism, my parents asked detailed questions about the business model, the partnership structure, the marketing plan. They treated it as a real venture, worthy of serious consideration. "Why didn't you tell us you were working on this?" my mother asked. I considered several diplomatic answers before settling on honesty. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could make it work, and because I wasn't sure you'd take it seriously." The admission hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. My parents exchanged a look that suggested they were having a conversation without words. "We've always taken your ambitions seriously," my father said finally. "Dad," I said gently, 2 weeks ago, you suggested I apply for a job at Subway." Another silence, this one tinged with realization. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "We were wrong," she said simply. "We were trying to be practical, but we were wrong." The rest of the dinner was spent discussing the coffee shop in detail. Sarah offered to help with social media marketing, drawing on her professional experience. My parents asked about grand opening plans and whether there was anything they could do to support the launch. Uncle Robert, who arrived late due to traffic, was immediately brought up to speed and offered to help with the accounting setup. It was a transformation that felt both gradual and sudden. The same people who had seen me as someone in need of guidance were now treating me as someone capable of significant achievement. The shift wasn't just in their perception, but in how I carried myself, how I spoke about my plans, how I inhabited my own ambitions. The coffee shop, which we named Grind and Grace, opened 10 weeks later. The launch exceeded our expectations, drawing not just neighborhood residents, but coffee enthusiasts from across the city. The combination of high-quality products, knowledgeable staff, and community-focused atmosphere created exactly the kind of space I'd envisioned. Sarah was one of our first regular customers, stopping by on her way to work and bringing friends for weekend visits. My parents became unofficial ambassadors, recommending the shop to friends and business associates. The family dynamic shifted in ways that were subtle but profound. But the real measure of success wasn't financial, though the business performed well from the start. It was the sense of alignment between who I was and how I was living, between my capabilities and my circumstances. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was being seen clearly, not just by my family, but by myself. The journey from that humiliating dinner to the successful business launch taught me several crucial lessons about family dynamics, self-advocacy, and the power of believing in your own vision, even when others don't share it. First, I learned that sometimes the people who love us most can also be the ones who see us least clearly. My parents weren't trying to be cruel or dismissive when they suggested the Subway job. They were operating from their own understanding of safety and practicality, trying to protect me from what they saw as the risks of entrepreneurship. But their protection was also limitation, and I had to learn to distinguish between love and enablement. Second, I discovered that external validation, while nice, isn't necessary for success. The months I spent waiting for my family's approval were months I could have spent building. The confidence I needed had to come from within, from my own assessment of my capabilities and potential. Once I stopped requiring their belief in my vision, I was free to pursue it with the energy and focus it deserved. Third, I learned that demonstration is more powerful than explanation. All the conversations in the world couldn't have convinced my family that I was capable of building a successful business. But the signed partnership agreement, the lease, the business plan, these concrete achievements spoke louder than any argument I could have made. Fourth, I realized that changing family dynamics requires changing your own behavior first. As long as I accepted the role of the family member who needed guidance and support, that's how I would be treated. When I began acting like someone capable of independent success, the family dynamic shifted to accommodate that new reality. Finally, I learned that success isn't just about achieving your goals, but about becoming the person capable of achieving them. The coffee shop was important, but the transformation in how I saw myself and how I approached challenges was more valuable than any business success. The story doesn't end with the coffee shop opening, of course. Business success requires ongoing attention, adaptation, and growth. But the foundation had been established. Not just for the business, but for a new way of being in the world, a new relationship with my own potential. 6 months after opening, Elena and I were discussing expansion possibilities. The original location was performing well enough to justify additional investment, and we'd identified 2 other neighborhoods that might support similar concepts. I found myself in the position of having to make decisions about growth, about scaling, about the kind of business leader I wanted to become. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year earlier, I'd been seen as someone who needed help finding basic employment. Now I was making decisions about multi-location expansion, managing staff, developing vendor relationships, and building a brand that extended beyond my initial vision. The transformation wasn't just professional. The confidence I'd gained in business carried over into other areas of my life. I became more assertive in family discussions, more willing to share my opinions, more comfortable taking up space in conversations. I started dating again, something I'd put on hold while working on the business plan. I began making long-term plans that extended beyond just surviving to the next month. Most importantly, I developed a different relationship with risk. Instead of seeing challenges as evidence of my inadequacy, I began seeing them as opportunities for growth and learning. When problems arose at the coffee shop, and they did regularly, I approached them as puzzles to solve rather than personal failures to endure. The family dinners that had once been sources of stress became opportunities to share updates about the business, to ask for advice on challenges I was facing, to celebrate successes both large and small. My parents began consulting me on their own business decisions, recognizing that my entrepreneurial experience gave me insights they valued. Sarah and I grew closer as well. The competitive dynamic that had characterized our relationship, or rather, the dynamic where I felt competitive while she seemed oblivious to any competition, transformed into something more collaborative. She helped with marketing strategies. I advised her on a small side business she was considering. We became allies rather than rivals. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I related to my own ambitions. Instead of seeing my goals as distant possibilities that required other people's permission, I began seeing them as natural extensions of my capabilities. The coffee shop was successful, but it was also a foundation for whatever came next. Elena and I did expand, eventually opening 3 additional locations across the city. Each new shop refined our concept, deepened our understanding of what customers wanted, and strengthened our partnership. By the end of the 2nd year, we were being approached by investors interested in franchising opportunities. The business success was gratifying, but the personal transformation was more profound. I had become someone who could envision possibilities and then create the conditions for those possibilities to become reality. The shift from waiting for permission to taking initiative had unlocked capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Looking back, I can see that the humiliating dinner at Sarah's birthday was actually a gift, though I certainly didn't experience it that way at the time. It clarified something that had been unclear, forced me to confront a dynamic that had been limiting my growth, and provided the motivation I needed to take risks I'd been avoiding. The suggestion about the subway job wasn't just insensitive. It was the wake-up call I needed to stop accepting other people's limited vision of my potential. It forced me to decide whether I was going to live according to their expectations or according to my own understanding of what I was capable of achieving. The choice, once I recognized it clearly, was obvious. I chose to bet on myself, to build something meaningful, to prove that the quiet confidence I'd been nurturing was justified. The coffee shop was successful, but more importantly, I was successful in becoming the person I'd always known I could be. The family dynamics have settled into a new equilibrium, one based on mutual respect rather than assumed limitation. My parents have become genuine supporters of my business ventures, offering advice when asked and celebrating successes without surprise. Sarah and I have developed a relationship based on shared ambition rather than comparative achievement. But the most important relationship that changed was the one I have with myself. I learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own vision, to take my own ambitions seriously. I discovered that the approval I'd been seeking from others had to come from within first, and that once I provided that approval, others were more likely to follow. The story of the coffee shop is also a story about the power of patience, preparation, and persistence. The success didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't the result of luck or circumstance. It was the result of years of developing expertise, building relationships, and maintaining faith in a vision that others couldn't initially see. Today, when I walk into any of our locations, I see not just a successful business, but a testament to the power of believing in yourself, even when others don't. I see proof that it's possible to transform not just your circumstances, but your entire relationship with possibility. The journey from that embarrassing dinner to business success taught me that sometimes the most important battles are fought in the quiet moments when you decide who you're going to be, how you're going to respond to limitation, and whether you're going to accept other people's assessment of your potential. I chose to reject the limitation, to respond with action rather than acceptance, and to trust my own assessment of what I was capable of achieving. The coffee shop was successful, but the real success was in becoming someone who could create that success. The story continues, of course. Business growth brings new challenges, new opportunities, new decisions about the kind of leader and entrepreneur I want to become. But the foundation is solid now. Not just the business foundation, but the personal foundation of self-belief, self-advocacy, and self-determination. And sometimes when I'm having a particularly challenging day, I remember that dinner, that moment of humiliation, that suggestion about the subway job. I remember how it felt to be seen as someone who needed basic employment guidance, and I use that memory as fuel for whatever ambitious project I'm currently pursuing. The most powerful transformations often begin with the most uncomfortable moments. The key is learning to see those moments not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as opportunities to prove your capabilities to the person who matters most, yourself. They bought her a Loft, a personal journey of resilience. I've always believed that the most defining moments in our lives aren't the victories we planned for, but the defeats we never saw coming. They're the moments when the people closest to us reveal truths we weren't ready to hear. When the fabric of our carefully constructed self-image gets torn apart by a single sentence, a misplaced assumption, or in my case, a job suggestion that felt like a slap across the face. It was my sister Emma's 25th birthday, and our parents had planned what they called a milestone celebration at Romano's, this upscale Italian restaurant downtown, where the lighting is dim enough to hide your tears, and the wine expensive enough to justify them. I remember walking into that private dining room, seeing the way they decorated it with gold streamers and those fancy balloon arrangements that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. The table was set for 8, our immediate family plus Emma's boyfriend, Marcus, who had somehow become the golden child by association. I should have known something was different the moment I saw my father's face. He had this look, this barely contained excitement, that reminded me of a child hiding a Christmas present. My mother was practically vibrating with anticipation, smoothing down her dress every few seconds and checking her phone for what I assumed were last-minute party details. Emma sat at the head of the table, radiant in that effortless way she'd always possessed, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The conversation flowed easily at first. We talked about Emma's promotion at the marketing firm, her recent trip to Barcelona with Marcus, their plans for the summer. I contributed when I could, sharing stories about my customers at the coffee shop, where I'd been working part-time while developing my business plan. I'd been working on opening my own cafe for months, researching locations, perfecting recipes, building a social media presence that was slowly but steadily growing. I had notebooks filled with ideas, sketches of the interior design I envisioned, spreadsheets tracking my savings progress. But none of that seemed to matter to my family. To them, I was still the dreamer, the one who hadn't quite figured things out yet, the one who needed guidance rather than encouragement. The first course came and went. Antipasti, perfectly arranged on marble plates, accompanied by stories about Emma's latest client presentation. The second course arrived, and with it, my father's announcement that he had a surprise. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that usually contains jewelry but was clearly too large for a ring. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "your mother and I have been talking about how proud we are of the woman you've become. You've worked so hard, achieved so much, and we wanted to give you something that reflects not just our love, but our confidence in your future." He handed her the box, and I watched as she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a key, modern and sleek, attached to a keychain that read, "Home Sweet Home." The confusion on Emma's face was almost comical. But before she could ask the obvious question, my mother pulled out an envelope. "It's a loft," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "A beautiful loft in the Arts District. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, exposed brick, hardwood floors, and a view of the city skyline. It's yours, sweetheart. No mortgage, no rent, no strings attached. We bought it outright." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my stomach drop, not out of jealousy, but out of a sudden, crushing realization of what this gesture represented. This wasn't just a generous gift. It was a declaration of faith, a vote of confidence in Emma's stability and future success. It was the kind of investment parents make when they believe their child has proven themselves worthy of such trust. Emma burst into tears, of course. Happy tears, grateful tears, the kind of tears that come from being overwhelmed by love and generosity. Marcus was beaming, already talking about how this would change their timeline for getting engaged, how they could start building their life together, in earnest. My parents were glowing with satisfaction, basking in the joy they'd created. And I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. My sister, who had graduated college the same year I did, who had landed her first real job just 18 months ago, had just been handed a piece of real estate worth more than most people earn in a decade. It wasn't that I begrudged her the gift. Emma was brilliant, hard-working, and deserved every good thing that came her way. But the casual nature of it, the way it was presented as a natural progression rather than an extraordinary gesture, made me acutely aware of how differently my parents viewed our respective futures. I forced myself to smile, to clap along with everyone else, to make the appropriate sounds of excitement and congratulations. I hugged Emma, told her how happy I was for her, and meant every word. But underneath the genuine joy I felt for my sister was a growing sense of my own invisibility, my own perceived instability in my parents' eyes. The celebration continued around me, but I felt like I was watching it through glass. Emma was showing Marcus pictures of the loft on her phone, downloaded from the real estate listing our parents had bookmarked. It was stunning, I had to admit. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a modern kitchen with granite countertops, a living room that opened onto a private balcony. The kind of space I'd dreamed about having for my cafe, with its industrial aesthetic and abundant natural light. "It's perfect for entertaining," my mother was saying, already planning Emma's housewarming party. "And the location is incredible. Your walking distance from all the best restaurants, that new art gallery, and the farmer's market on Saturdays. I knew the neighborhood well. I'd been scouting it for months, looking for affordable commercial space where I could open my cafe. The rent was astronomical, but the foot traffic was consistent, and the demographic was exactly what I needed for my business model. Seeing Emma handed a property in that same area, for free, felt like watching someone else win the lottery with numbers I'd been playing for years. But the real blow came during dessert. The server had just brought out Emma's birthday cake, this elaborate chocolate creation with gold leaf and fresh berries, when my mother turned to me with what I can only describe as an afterthought expression. "Oh, Jake," she said, her voice casual in the way that makes devastating comments seem like pleasant conversation. I almost forgot. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Louis from the subway downtown is hiring. You know, the one near the courthouse. He's looking for someone reliable, and she thought you might be interested. You should definitely reach out to him. The fork in my hand felt suddenly heavy. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the laws of physics had momentarily forgotten how to work properly. I looked at my mother, trying to determine if she was serious, if she had actually just suggested that I apply for a job at Subway while we were celebrating my sister's receipt of a luxury loft. "Mom," I said carefully, "I've been working on opening my own cafe. I've told you about the business plan, the social media account I've been building, the savings I've been accumulating. I've been documenting the entire process." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that's nice, honey. But you need something stable in the meantime. Something with benefits and a steady paycheck. This cafe idea is lovely, but it's not realistic for someone in your position. Someone in my position." The phrase hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I looked around the table hoping someone would challenge this assessment, would point out that I was 25 years old, with a college degree and a solid work history. But Emma was still admiring her key. Marcus was calculating property values on his phone, and my father was already discussing the logistics of Emma's move. "I think what your mother means," my father added, clearly trying to soften the blow, "is that having a reliable income while you pursue your entrepreneurial interests would be smart. Building a business takes time, and having financial stability would allow you to take more risks with your cafe concept." Financial stability. As if the loft they'd just given Emma wasn't worth more than most people's entire financial stability. As if the gesture they'd just made for her wasn't the exact kind of support that would allow someone to take entrepreneurial risks. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain that I wasn't some directionless kid playing at being a business owner. I had a plan, a vision, and most importantly, I had been making progress. My Instagram account for the cafe concept had gained over 3,000 followers in the past 6 months. I'd been posting daily content about coffee culture, recipe development, and the journey of building a business from scratch. I'd connected with suppliers, researched permits, and had even started conversations with potential investors who had found me through my online presence. But none of that seemed to register with my family. To them, I was still the uncertain kid who needed guidance, who needed to be pointed toward safe, conventional choices, rather than encouraged to pursue ambitious dreams. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. I made the appropriate responses when spoken to, laughed at the right moments, and managed to maintain the facade of celebration until it was socially acceptable to leave. Emma was still glowing with excitement about her new loft, making plans to visit it the next day, talking about furniture shopping and decorating ideas. My parents were basking in their role as generous benefactors, already planning their next visit to see how Emma had settled in. "We should do this more often," my mother said as we were saying our goodbyes. Family dinners are so important, especially now that you kids are building your own lives. Building our own lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emma was being handed the foundation for her life, while I was being directed towards sandwich construction. I drove home that night in a state of emotional numbness that I'd never experienced before. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was certainly some of that. It wasn't sadness, though. I felt the weight of disappointment settling in my chest. It was something more complex, more destabilizing. It was the realization that the people who knew me best, who had raised me, and supposedly loved me unconditionally, had such little faith in my abilities that they couldn't even see the work I'd been doing. My apartment felt smaller when I walked in, shabbier, more temporary. The walls were covered with printouts of my cafe concept, mood boards with color schemes and furniture ideas, photos of coffee shops that inspired me. My laptop was still open on the kitchen table, displaying the spreadsheet where I tracked my savings progress and business expenses. The notebook where I wrote down recipe ideas and customer feedback was lying next to it, filled with my handwriting and coffee stains. All of this evidence of my dedication, my planning, my progress, and yet my family saw none of it. They saw someone who needed to be rescued, someone who needed to be guided toward the safety of employment, rather than encouraged toward the risk of entrepreneurship. I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at that spreadsheet. The numbers weren't impressive by luxury Loft standards, but they represented months of discipline, sacrifice, and hope. Every dollar I'd saved was a dollar I hadn't spent on entertainment, on clothes, on the kind of lifestyle my peers were living. Every hour I'd spent researching and planning was an hour I could have spent relaxing, socializing, or pursuing easier paths. But looking at those numbers in the context of what had just happened, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't just building a business. I was building proof. Proof that I could execute a plan, that I could delay gratification, that I could work toward a goal without external validation or support. The cafe wasn't just a dream. It was a statement about who I was and what I was capable of. That night, I made a decision that would reshape not just my business timeline, but my entire relationship with my family's expectations. I decided to stop trying to earn their faith and start proving my worth through results. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I made coffee using the beans I'd been sourcing from a local roaster, practicing the techniques I'd learned from countless YouTube videos and online courses. I opened my laptop and looked at my social media metrics, really looked at them for the first time in weeks. The growth was steady, the engagement was real, and the community I'd been building was genuinely interested in what I was creating. More importantly, I had been getting messages from people asking about investment opportunities, partnership possibilities, and collaboration ideas. I'd been so focused on my family's approval that I'd barely registered the fact that strangers on the internet had more confidence in my vision than the people who raised me. I spent that day responding to every inquiry I had received, reaching out to potential investors, and scheduling meetings with people who had expressed interest in my concept. I updated my business plan, refined my pitch, and prepared materials that would present my cafe idea as the legitimate business opportunity it was, rather than the hobby my family seemed to think it was. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the business development process with an intensity that surprised even me. I met with 3 different potential investors, all of whom had found me through my social media presence. I presented my concept to a local business incubator program. I reached out to commercial real estate agents and scheduled tours of available properties. Most importantly, I documented everything, every meeting, every conversation, every small victory and setback. I created a video series about the process of building a business from scratch, sharing the real, unglamorous details of entrepreneurship. The response was incredible. My follower count doubled, then tripled. I started getting messages from other aspiring entrepreneurs, from people who saw their own dreams reflected in my journey. But the real breakthrough came during a meeting with David Chen, a local investor who had made his fortune in tech before transitioning to hospitality investments. He'd reached out to me after seeing my content, intrigued by my approach to building community around coffee culture. "Your social media presence is impressive," he said, reviewing my portfolio on his tablet. "But what really caught my attention is your consistency. You've been posting daily for 6 months, engaging with your audience, building genuine relationships. That kind of dedication tells me you understand what it takes to build something sustainable." He offered me a partnership deal on the spot, not just funding but mentorship, connections, and most importantly, validation from someone who understood business development. The terms were more generous than I dared to hope for, giving me enough capital to secure a prime location and cover operating expenses for the first year. The location he had in mind was in the Arts District, 2 blocks from Emma's new loft. I signed the partnership agreement that afternoon, but I didn't tell anyone about it immediately. Instead, I spent the weekend finalizing details, securing the lease, and preparing for the next phase of development. I wanted to make sure everything was completely locked in before I shared the news, partly because I wanted to avoid any potential setbacks, but mostly because I wanted to control the narrative. The next family dinner was scheduled for the following Sunday, a casual gathering to celebrate Emma's successful move into her new loft. She'd been posting photos of her decorating process, and the space looked incredible. Minimalist furniture, carefully curated art, and those floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. I arrived at Romano's that Sunday with an envelope in my jacket pocket and a confidence I'd never felt before. The conversation was predictably focused on Emma's new living situation, her plans for hosting dinner parties, and her excitement about the neighborhood. "The coffee shop on the corner is amazing," she was saying as I sat down. "I've been going there every morning before work. The owner is this young guy who's built this incredible community around the place. People work there all day, and he knows everyone's name in their usual order. It's exactly the kind of place I was hoping to find in the neighborhood." I smiled, knowing exactly which coffee shop she was talking about. It was one of the spaces I'd studied extensively during my research, a perfect example of the kind of atmosphere I wanted to create. "That's wonderful," my mother said. "It's so important to have those little luxuries that make a neighborhood feel like home. Speaking of which, Jake, did you ever reach out to Louis at the subway? Mrs. Patterson asked me about it yesterday." There it was. The same casual dismissal, the same assumption that I hadn't taken their advice seriously, that I was still floating without direction or purpose. "Actually," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I have some news to share." I pulled out the envelope and placed it on the table, much the same way my father had done with Emma's key 2 weeks earlier. The gesture was intentional, a deliberate parallel that I hoped would highlight the contrast between their expectations and my reality. "I've been working on something for the past few months," I continued, "and I wanted to wait until everything was finalized before sharing it with you." I opened the envelope and pulled out the partnership agreement, the lease documents, and the business plan I'd refined over the past 2 weeks. I spread them out on the table like a poker player, revealing a winning hand. "I'm opening a cafe," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Not someday, not eventually, but in 8 weeks. I have a partner who's providing the funding, a location that's already been secured, and a business plan that's been vetted by multiple industry professionals." The silence that followed was different from the one that had greeted Emma's gift. This wasn't the silence of surprise and joy. This was the silence of recalibration, of assumptions being challenged and narratives being rewritten. Emma was the first to speak. "Jake, this is incredible. Where's the location?" "2 blocks from your loft," I said, meeting her eyes. "On 5th Street, in that converted warehouse building with the exposed brick and the large windows facing the street." I watched as the information sank in, as the geography of the situation became clear. Emma's eyes widened with recognition. "That's the space that's been under construction for the past month," she said. "I walk past it every day on my way to work. I've been wondering what was going in there. It's going to be called Grind Coffee Culture," I said, pulling out my phone to show them the logo I'd been developing. "The concept is community-focused, with locally sourced ingredients, specialty drinks, and a space designed for both productivity and social interaction." My father picked up the business plan, flipping through pages of market analysis, financial projections, and operational strategies. His expression was unreadable, but I could see him processing the information, recognizing the thoroughness of the preparation. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this." "I've been working on it for 8 months," I said. "The social media presence I've been building has over 10,000 followers now, and I've been using it to test concepts, gather feedback, and build a customer base before we even open." "Ah." My mother was looking at the partnership agreement, her brow furrowed in concentration. "David Chen," she read aloud. "I think I know that name. Isn't he the one who developed that restaurant group downtown? He's invested in several successful hospitality ventures," I confirmed. "He reached out to me after seeing my content online. He said my approach to community building was exactly what he looks for in potential partners." The conversation that followed was unlike any I'd ever had with my family. For the first time, they were asking me questions about my business, my plans, my vision for the future. They wanted to know about my target demographic, my marketing strategy, my timeline for expansion. They were treating me like an entrepreneur rather than a dreamer, like someone whose ideas had value rather than someone who needed guidance. Emma was particularly excited about the proximity to her loft. "I can't believe you're going to be practically neighbors," she said. "I'll be your first regular customer. I can help you test recipes, give you feedback on the atmosphere, maybe even help with social media content." The offer was genuine, enthusiastic, and completely different from the dynamic I'd expected. Instead of being the family member who needed help, I was suddenly the one being asked for involvement in something exciting and new. But the real validation came from my parents' response. My father asked detailed questions about my financial projections, my understanding of the local market, and my plans for managing the operational challenges of running a restaurant business. My mother wanted to know about my staffing plans, my supplier relationships, and my vision for creating a sustainable company culture. These weren't the questions you ask someone whose dreams you're humoring. These were the questions you ask someone whose business you're taking seriously. "I have to admit," my father said as we were finishing dinner, "I'm impressed. This isn't the kind of venture someone stumbles into. You've clearly been planning this for a long time." "I have," I said. "And I understand why you suggested the subway job. From the outside, it probably looked like I was just floating, not making progress toward anything concrete. But I was building something the whole time. I just needed to prove it to myself before I could prove it to anyone else." The drive home that night felt completely different from the one I'd taken 2 weeks earlier. Instead of feeling diminished by my family's expectations, I felt energized by their recognition. Instead of questioning my own vision, I felt confident in the path I'd chosen. But more importantly, I understood something about family dynamics that I'd never recognized before. My parents hadn't been trying to diminish my dreams when they suggested the subway job. They'd been trying to protect me from the disappointment they feared I might experience. Their lack of faith in my entrepreneurial abilities wasn't malicious. It was cautious, born from a desire to see me succeed in ways they understood. The problem was that their understanding of success was limited to traditional paths, stable employment, and conventional markers of achievement. They couldn't see the value in the work I was doing because it didn't fit their framework for what legitimate business development looked like. Opening Grind Coffee Culture became more than just a business venture. It became a bridge between my family's expectations and my own ambitions. The process of building the cafe, documenting the journey, and sharing the experience with my growing online community taught me lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of believing in your own vision, even when the people closest to you can't see it. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late October. I'd been promoting the event through my social media channels for weeks, partnering with local influencers and food bloggers to build anticipation. The space looked incredible, with exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and a custom-built espresso bar that David had insisted on importing from Italy. My family was there, of course, along with Emma's boyfriend, Marcus, and several of their friends. But they were joined by dozens of people I'd never met in person, followers who had been watching my journey online and wanted to support the business they felt invested in. The morning was a whirlwind of activity. Orders came in faster than I'd anticipated. The line stretched out the door, and the atmosphere was electric with excitement and caffeine. Emma had brought several of her co-workers who were all impressed by the space and the quality of the drinks. My parents spent the morning helping with small tasks, clearly proud but also somewhat amazed by the response. But the moment that crystallized everything for me came around noon, when the initial rush had died down, and I had a chance to look around the space. The tables were full of people working on laptops, having conversations, and enjoying the atmosphere I'd worked so hard to create. The sound system was playing the carefully curated playlist I'd developed. The lighting was perfect, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. This was what I had been working toward for months. Not just a successful business, but a community space that brought people together, that added value to the neighborhood, that reflected my vision of what a coffee shop could be. Emma approached me while I was behind the counter, taking a brief break from the constant activity. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice serious despite the celebration happening around us. "For what?" "For not seeing this sooner. For not recognizing how much work you were putting into this. How serious you were about making it happen. I think we all just assumed you were going through a phase that you hadn't really thought it through." I looked at her. This sister who had always been the golden child, the one who had received the loft and the faith and the assumption of competence, and realized that she was experiencing her own moment of recalibration. "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "I understand why it looked like I was just dreaming. I hadn't proven anything yet. I was just talking about ideas and posting on social media. But sometimes you have to believe in something before you can prove it's worth believing in." She smiled, glancing around at the bustling cafe. "Well, you've definitely proved it now. The success of Grind Coffee Culture exceeded even my own expectations. Within 3 months, we were operating at full capacity most days, with regular customers who came not just for the coffee but for the community we'd created. The online presence I'd built translated into real-world loyalty, and the investment David had made was paying off ahead of schedule. But the real transformation was in how my family saw me, and more importantly, how I saw myself. I wasn't the dreamer who needed guidance anymore. I was the entrepreneur who had executed a vision. I wasn't the one who needed financial stability. I was the one who had created it for myself and several employees. The cafe became a gathering place for the neighborhood, a success story that demonstrated the power of believing in your own vision even when others can't see it. It proved that sometimes the most meaningful victories come not from meeting other people's expectations, but from exceeding your own. 6 months after opening, I was featured in a local business journal as one of the city's entrepreneurs to watch. The article talked about my approach to community building, my use of social media to create authentic connections, and my vision for expanding the concept to other neighborhoods. My parents framed the article and hung it in their kitchen, right next to Emma's graduation photo and her promotion announcement. For the first time, I felt like I was being celebrated for my own achievements, rather than being guided towards someone else's definition of success. The experience taught me that family dynamics are complex, that love and doubt can coexist, and that sometimes the people who care about us most are the ones who have the hardest time seeing our potential. But it also taught me that proving yourself to others is less important than proving yourself to yourself, and that the most satisfying victories are the ones that come from refusing to accept limitations that others place on your dreams. Today, as I write this, grind coffee culture is approaching its 2nd anniversary. We've expanded to include evening hours, live music events, and a small food menu. The community we've built extends far beyond the physical space, with customers who have become friends, collaborators, and advocates for the business. Emma is still one of our regular customers, stopping by most mornings before work and often bringing friends who are new to the neighborhood. My parents have become unexpected ambassadors for the cafe, recommending it to their friends and proudly sharing updates about our success. But perhaps most importantly, the cafe has become a symbol of what's possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations on your dreams. It's a reminder that success isn't just about achieving your goals. It's about maintaining faith in your vision, even when the people closest to you can't see it. The journey from that humiliating birthday dinner to the thriving business I run today wasn't just about opening a cafe. It was about learning to trust my own judgment, to value my own vision, and to understand that sometimes the most important person you need to prove yourself to is yourself. In the end, they bought Emmy a loft and suggested I work at Subway. Instead, I built a business that serves the community where she lives, created jobs for people who share my passion for coffee culture, and proved that sometimes the most unconventional paths lead to the most meaningful destinations. The difference between dreaming and achieving isn't talent or luck or even opportunity. It's the willingness to keep working toward your vision even when the people who love you most can't see it yet. It's the courage to bet on yourself when others won't, and the persistence to prove that your dreams are worth more than their doubts. That's the story of how I went from being the family member who needed career advice to being the one who created his own success. It's the story of how a suggestion to work at Subway became the catalyst for building something far more meaningful than anyone imagined. And it's the story of how sometimes the most important victory are the ones that prove to yourself that you were capable of more than anyone else believed. The cafe is busy today, filled with the usual mix of regulars and newcomers, professionals and students, neighbors and visitors. The espresso machine is humming, the conversations are flowing, and the atmosphere is exactly what I envisioned when I first started planning this space. And every morning when I unlock the door and flip the sign from closed to open, I'm reminded that the most satisfying success is the kind that comes from refusing to accept limitations others place on your dreams. It's the kind that proves not just what you can achieve, but who you really are when you stop trying to meet other people's expectations and start exceeding your own. The journey continues, the community grows, and the dream that started as a reaction to family doubt has become a testament to the power of believing in yourself, even when others can't see your vision yet. That's the real story of grind coffee culture, and it's a story that continues to unfold every day, one customer, one conversation, and one perfectly crafted cup of coffee at a time.